Hi, I'm Hudson, publisher of Crisis Magazine in Washington, D.C., and this is the Church and Culture Today. Today we're going to talk about sports. You know, we often don't address sports in the context of our concern for the church and its moral teaching, but I think we'll all agree that sports plays a very important role in the formation of our children. It affects our families, it affects our values, it affects the kinds of things that our young people especially aspire to be. And there's no better person to address this issue than Bowie Kuhn, who was Commissioner of Baseball for 16 years, from 1969 to 1984, and had a very public role in keeping Major League Baseball the kind of American sport and American institution that it certainly was then. But Bowie, that's really what we want to talk about. I mean, what has happened to sports? I mean, sports used to be the game of heroes and role models. I mean, these weren't all good guys. But nowadays, so often, major sports figures are people that we really don't want influencing our children.
I think what's happened in sports deal is that the money has gotten so big. Whether you're talking about amateur sports or whether you're talking about professional sports, the money has gotten so big that it tends to dominate the philosophy of the sports to the extent they have any persistent philosophy at all.
Right.
And thereby draw us away from the better values, the better cultural values that sports once represented in this country. I don't say sports is bad, although one could debate on balance whether it's good or bad, and I'd be inclined to say it's good. But certainly the balance question is one which is tipping in the wrong direction.
Because of the financial incentives involved?
I think because of the financial incentives involved, and because you also see the deterioration of the moral culture of our country, and there's no reason to think that that isn't just as pervasive in sports as it is in politics or other places.
Seems to me the most important function that sports plays in our development is what we do as young people. I mean, my daughter's now on her first softball team, and all of a sudden I'm no longer the player, I'm the first base coach. But I watch this formation in the virtues that you and I have talked about before. Honesty, fair play, and even formation in motor skills, in judgment, in quick attention, and quick reads and studies and so forth. But now we have this overwhelming presence of sports as entertainment. And where there is entertainment, money is going to be involved. So are you talking about this balance between sports as the formation of the human person and their character, and sports as an entertainment commodity to be bought and sold?
Well, I think that's one way to state the balance. At its best, sports is all of those things you said and more. It teaches teamwork, it teaches tolerance, it teaches understanding, it teaches patience, it teaches diligence, it teaches perseverance.
And your golf game attests to all these things.
Yeah, my golf game doesn't prove a thing. Unfortunately, it doesn't prove a thing. I wish it did. But it teaches all those things at best. And if you look at the colleges, you still see some pretty good examples of that teaching quality present. For instance, you could look at the Ivy League sports, non-scholarship sports. Don't look at the Ivy League in other directions, look at the Ivy League in this direction. Right. And in terms of its sports, it does a pretty good job of making sports secondary to education. Now, there's a key. Secondary to education is only part of the educational system.
Well, even in the playing of sports, I mean, shouldn't sports itself, the activity of any game we play, be secondary to playing it fairly? So
in my judgment, the answer to that is yes.
I mean, can we have games where there's fairness, where there is no justice and honesty?
Yes, you can, and you do.
But it spoils the game.
But in my judgment, it spoils the game. Yeah. But does it spoil it for the great majority of Americans? I'm not so sure that it does. I think there's a danger here, again, that the decline in the moral culture of the country makes it easier for people to accept sports that are less than wholesome.
That's right.
Including amateur sports. I mean, when you get into big-time sports, move the Ivy League model over here, or move Thomas Aquinas College over here, which doesn't even have intercollegiate sports, but only plays it on campus.
Yeah, intramural sports.
Intramural sports, pure and simple. And you look at where big-time amateur sports is in this country today. The athletes, do they graduate? Do they get a true education? Are they paid on the side? All these questions arise. That's why the NCAA has to be busy all the time to check this all out. And I'm sure many things go through the net. So what kind of a message does it send when the great athletes of amateur sports are guys who are on the take or aren't getting an education, though they pretend to, don't graduate from college and so forth? This is a very bad message.
I mean, it's a long way from Chariots of Fire.
It's a long, long way from
And the idea of the sports scholar, the gentleman sportsman, we're a long way from the time when sports and the idea of virtue and justice and courtesy walked hand in hand. I remember a story from an old Fordham football team. You know, I taught at Fordham for a while, in which one of the 7 blocks of granite was playing against some other team, and one of the guys on the line had a shoulder injury. And just before the game, he said, "Which shoulder is it?" And the guy told him, and he didn't hit him on that shoulder during the entire game.
That's hard to believe.
Now, you know, why have we lost? I mean, first of all, have we lost that completely? Surely there are Major League Baseball players out there that have that kind of sense of fair play and generosity.
Oh, I'm sure there are.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are, but winning is the dominant model in sports, in professional sports. Professional sports at least has the merit of being, in a sense, honest.
Yes.
It doesn't pretend to be something it isn't. The way it's done and the way it's performed may be less than honest sometimes. But it's essentially a thing where the athletes are paid to do their job, and there's no pretense about that. And there's no question that there's something that is supposed to be secondary to, as in college athletics.
Now, part of what we're addressing in this series is the role of Catholics in positions of leadership, and the effect that Catholics can have, Catholics who want to live up to the standards of their faith, in leadership positions in the culture. Now, you were Commissioner of Baseball. Now, I was a young man, Bowie, but I was very aware of the role, the moral role you held. I mean, you held players and owners and coaches to a standard of behavior. I mean, it was clear that you had a pretty tough job, and you weren't going to let baseball be, flushed down the drain. Now, since you've left, and there have been other leaders, and there have been some, different kinds of people, there is the sense that an era has gone by, and an era that you represent as much as anybody.
Well, I think there is that sense, and I think this is not really going to be good for the great team sports at the professional level. When I came on the scene, and of course this goes way back to 1969, which is quite a long time ago now, we still had the aura of Judge Landis.
Right.
Now, Judge Landis was no saint.
Now, he was the owner of the...
He was the first commissioner of baseball.
That's right.
Came in 1921. It came at a time when baseball was corrupt.
That's right.
Players were, and owners, no doubt, were involved in corruption, and something had to be done about it. So he suspended all the Black Sox players who had thrown the 1919 World Series. Right. And he created an aura in the game of absolute rigidity in terms of what was proper and what was improper.
Right.
There'd be no gambling, there'd be no crookedness, players would toe the line, owners would toe the line.
Right.
Everybody would toe the line under the leadership of Landis. That was the mode of Landis, the model of Landis. That feeling was still a pretty strong feeling when I became commissioner following Ford Frick, really. General Eckert was in there for a little while. But I followed Ford Frick, who was a man of great rectitude, a good word, and one that you don't necessarily find associated with sports leaders these days.
Right.
He had that. I tried very hard in my time to have that, so that if you got involved with any kind of gambling, whether it was Mays or Mantle or anybody, you were out. I mean, either you got away from gambling or you didn't play.
There were
game.
Rules, and they were enforced.
There were rules. If you got involved with drugs, I suspended people. If owners broke rules, I suspended owners. Right. I suspended everybody in the game from one.
I mean, nowadays you sort of wonder what you have to do to be kicked off a team or to be suspended.
That's a very proper observation, and one that troubles me a great deal about today's sports. It troubles me about the media in observing today's sports. I see things happen out there, and nothing is done. I say, well, somebody must be raising a question about this. Nobody seems to be raising a question.
Dennis Rodman kicks a cameraman between the legs intentionally, without provocation. And what did he do? Miss 3 games or something?
Yeah, very little.
Right.
Albert Bell yesterday, because he was booed in Cleveland, made an obscene gesture.
That's right. Is anything going to happen?
I don't know. I hope something would be done.
If you were a commissioner, what would you do?
I think you'd suspend him for that. I mean, that's outrageous to make an obscene gesture to the fans because they boo you. That's what they pay for.
Then a New York Knicks basketball player did that to the Miami fans just a few weeks ago in a playoff game.
Yeah.
Nothing happened to him.
Now, occasionally you do see some very stern discipline, and it's good. Yeah. When the Knicks players came off the bench in a playoff game against the rules, they were suspended immediately, and it probably cost the Knicks that tier of championship.
That's right, it did.
Knocked them out. Good for the commissioner for doing that. But that is not the characteristic behavior we see among sports leaders today.
That's right. And, you know, it's pervasive. And you look at all the young men and women, and more young women now are involved, I think, and it's good. They're involved in amateur sports. But they look up to these players and their behavior both on and off the field, and they emulate it. Now, I've told you once before, I mean, I was a Mickey Mantle guy as a kid, absolute fanatic. But, you know, I was never aware of Mickey Mantle's escapades off the field. I looked up to him on the field as a hitter, a runner, a guy who played with pain, and that inspired me. It still inspires me. I didn't even think about what he was like off the field. So in a way, we have to cut this generation some slack because of the media. They're intensely aware of the players' behavior off the field in a way they never were before.
Absolutely correct. If the media were the watchdogs of some kind of morality, and they're not, sometimes they will raise these kinds of questions, but they're more raised as ethical questions, rules questions, than morality. Morality isn't something the media talks about or is very comfortable with. But there was a time when the media, the great writers, whether they're political writers or sports writers, talked about moral issues. And that goes to the whole question of, can we have a moral regeneration, a revival of religious values in this country? And that's a critical question.
As you know, I'm a student of the game of golf.
Yes.
And one thing I've been doing lately is reading some of the classic books on golf. And if you go back very quickly, to talk about golf is to talk about character, to talk about the virtues, to talk about the whole person. And I think all of sports are like that. I mean, if you don't have to go back very far to the Olympic ideal or to anything to get to moral and spiritual issues right in the heart of sport.
I think your golf example, though, is a very good one. I would like to say that all the sports have great moral virtues that lead the people, that help educate the people, that set an example for the people. But I can't say that. I wish I could. I can't say that. But golf is the exception. The golfers still, when nobody sees them, do something wrong, and they call strokes on themselves.
My ball's lost.
Right.
Yes.
They call it on themselves, and nobody's looking over their shoulder. They do it on themselves.
Except God.
Except God. And they're presumably aware of that fact.
That's right.
Bobby Jones.
Yes.
I mean, here was one of the great moral models.
Absolutely.
I mean, talk about honesty, endeavor, working through pain, playing through pain, all that stuff. But golf has consistently set, and today does set, a very high standard. And I give a lot of credit to the commissioners of the PGA Tour who've been very tough on these kinds of questions.
We'll come back to golf and Bobby Jones, who, by the way, was a convert to Catholicism, in just a minute. Hi, I'm Dale Hudson, publisher of Crisis Magazine. I'm having a fascinating conversation with the former Commissioner of Baseball, Bowie Kuhn. Bowie, what role did your Catholic faith play in all those decisions you had to make those 16 years you were Commissioner?
I think it played a lot. Because of my faith, I had a sense of right and wrong, a sense of morality, a sense of the unity of this throughout all phases of life. It's not something you leave at church. I mean, I was taught that. I believe that. And I believe that as commissioner, therefore, I don't think you leave morality outside the door, check it with your bumbershoot when you come in the office. So that when I looked at different kinds of problems, I looked at them not only in terms of the strict rule and that kind of question, but what was the right and what was the wrong. What was morally right and what was morally wrong. And I worried about the impact on kids. Big moral question. Big moral question. I worried about the impact on kids and the impact on the rest of the population.
Yeah.
And I'm proud to tell you that not only did I take this kind of philosophy, have this kind of philosophy, and use the word immoral
Right.
Publicly, but I drew fierce criticism for doing it. Then I knew I was getting home.
I remember that.
Yeah.
I do.
And I think it set a tone for my commissionership, which was good. And I think something else, that whatever the moral decline of the country, and some of it was certainly going on in my days as commissioner, I think baseball's strength in those days, in some measure, had to do with the fact that not only was I willing to talk morality as a leader of baseball, but that the baseball people, whether they liked it or not, were by and large prepared to accept my teaching morality in the commissioner's chair. So that's the way I would try to describe that deal.
Well, I'm proud that you're on the publication committee of Crisis Magazine, because you carry a lot of weight and have a lot of wisdom. I don't mean to say you're heavy, but you speak with authority.
225 deal. 225.
You know, a question that I've often wondered about, and then a little later, I want to ask you what you're doing nowadays since your days as commissioner. But you know, the Fellowship of Christian Athletes is very, very active in a lot of different sports. But I was disturbed by something I read the other day. I read a book about professional golfers who are Christians and who try to be serious about their faith on the tour, and almost half of these group of golfers were ex-Catholics who had become evangelical Protestants. And almost all of their stories were the same. I came to the tour, I met evangelical Christians, they made me realize I didn't know my faith, they made me realize that my Catholic faith wasn't alive for me, and so I had a new conversion, and now I'm an evangelical, and now I'm a real Christian. Now, is this kind of thing going on in professional sports? I mean, are there any Catholics out there who are evangelizing the culture of sports?
I don't think there are. I don't think Catholics are nearly as good at evangelizing as their evangelical friends are. We had the chapel, baseball chapel, when I was in baseball. I very much encouraged it. That was a almost totally evangelical movement. They were good. And the Catholics participated in that.
As Catholics?
As Catholics, yes, openly as Catholics. But it was good. It sent the right message, and I was happy to see it occur. I don't think it was a medium for conversion particularly, but it was a good message. And I think that's out there. Catholics, I think, need more and more to be stimulated to go out and be evangelicals, just as evangelical as our evangelical friends are evangelical.
Right.
And they really need to know that they have the truth, that they've got to go out and preach it. Preach it.
Right.
Our friends out there aren't afraid to preach it.
No.
And we're very important. Look how many radio stations around the country are evangelical. How many Catholic radio stations are there around the country?
Well, you know, that leads into some of the things you're doing now, and I know one thing you're doing is trying to get a Catholic AM station started in Jacksonville, Florida.
Yes, actually we have a station, WQOP, in Jacksonville, which has been on the air since February, carries Mother Angelica's signal completely.
Wonderful.
Off the satellite. And it's tremendous programming, 24 hours a day. You can wake up in the middle of the night, there it is. Tremendous programming, and I've been trying to help them with fundraising.
That's good. And you also are starting a Culture of Life Foundation.
Yes, with the encouragement of the Holy Father. Mercedes Wilson, a very prominent lady in the Catholic world, and I are co-chairman of the Culture of Life Foundation, which is designed to promote research on the great bioethical issues of our times and the social justice issues of our times. For instance, the relationship between abortion and breast cancer.
Right.
The worldly wise would tell you there is no relationship because they don't want you to think there's a relationship. Right. It's the job of our foundation to not only prove that there is a relationship, but to publicize it in a way that that people worldwide can understand that relationship. You could carry that into many other areas.
You know, it's wonderful that someone with your profile, Bowie, is willing to get involved and put your professional reputation on the line. You know, to go back to this issue of what's happened to professional sports, you know, I'm sure you've heard this story a million times over, but I, as an adult, I feel alienated from most professional sports. I don't want to watch professional football. I just don't like what I see there. I don't like the antics. I don't like the PR. I don't want to be told to go to Disney World, you know, at the end of the Super Bowl. It's just over-marketed. I feel somewhat the same way about basketball and even my beloved baseball. Now, fortunately, golf is hanging in there for me, and golf seems to me to be the last sport that is still somewhat safe from that kind of harm.
Let me make a point there.
Yeah.
In 1992, the Supreme Court in the Planned Parenthood case talked about
Casey versus Planned Parenthood.
Right,
Yeah.
talked about dignity and autonomy, a right to have your own dignity and
That's
autonomy.
right.
The court recognized something that's in our culture. Maybe it shouldn't be in our culture to the extent it is, but they recognized something and declared it to be constitutional, which in my judgment was nonsense. But it is that notion of personal dignity and autonomy which I think to a considerable extent is spoiling sports today. Too many people in sports with big salaries are saying, I can do my own thing my own way, I have my own dignity, my own autonomy, I'll do it my own way. And in the old days, when Joe McCarthy was manager of the Yankees, you think for 1 minute he'd have tolerated any of that dignity and autonomy. You work for me, buddy.
We needed him on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, we needed him on the Supreme Court, is right. You worked for me. I don't care whether you were Joe DiMaggio or whoever you were. When you were on a baseball team that Joe McCarthy was managing, you towed the line. Period, paragraph.
Well, what kept Joe DiMaggio from saying, McCarthy, I'll go play for the Cardinals if you don't like what I'm doing?
Because I think the emerging world of personal dignity and autonomy is a sort of a right. It wasn't something we thought about in those days. I think athletes didn't think about it. They didn't think that any right to go down that line and buck the management.
So they didn't think about just simply leaving a team and going to a team where they would let them stay out all night and miss practice?
Well, I think some of them probably did, but by and large, did they? No, I don't think so. But that was a very different culture, and you're talking about changes in our culture and the need to re-evangelize our culture. Well, there's a good example.
Can sports be part of that re-evangelization? I mean, do we have to first, does sports have to go through a conversion of its own before it can be a vehicle of re-evangelization?
Without any question, and I do not look for sports to be a successful evangelist. I mean, I might be surprised, but I don't look for it, except at certain levels. I mean, we talked before about the Ivy League, we talked before about Thomas Aquinas College or Steubenville.
Right.
Look at those sports programs,
yes.
University of Dallas, Christendom,
St. Thomas More.
St. Thomas More, you got it, right, Assumption.
Right.
I suspect if you look at those sports programs, maybe there's the beginning of evangelization in terms of how good sports, honest sports, well-played sports, sports where the guy who traps the ball doesn't pretend he didn't trap it,
right.
Where truth really prevails, in that sense, maybe you could begin something.
You know, emblematic of all this was the playoff game between the Atlanta Braves and New York Yankees, in which the young man stuck his glove over and caught a ball that really could have been caught by the Atlanta right fielder and won the game for the Yankees. Now, I'm a Yankee fan, as you know. I hope I don't get any hate mail for saying that, but I felt ashamed that Yankee fans would make this young man, who did it inadvertently, he wasn't trying to do something evil, he just stuck his glove over and caught the ball, but they made him into a celebrity.
Yeah, see, that's the problem.
Yeah.
I wouldn't blame the kid. I mean, the kid was...
I'd try to catch the ball, too.
Sure, it was instinctive. He wasn't premeditating anything. But the fact that he was made a hero for doing it, that was wrong. And again, we come back to one of the great institutions of society, that is the media, not seeing the right side of that issue. The kid should have been sort of scolded for that. He shouldn't have certainly been made a hero.
Right, right. Is there, I mean, what's going to turn the tables, Bowie? We have a couple of minutes left.
Well, start with John Paul II.
Okay. Our leader.
He is turning the tables.
Our leader.
He is turning the tables. His great encyclicals and the great preaching of that magnificent
And you're
man.
a reader, Bowie. I want our audience to know that you are a man who reads serious books.
I try my best.
That's wonderful.
I try my best. But I think it's going to take great leaders. It's going to take great leaders anywhere to make things happen.
Mother Angelica.
Mother Angelica, absolutely.
Right. And what's the next step? I mean, how do we get the grassroots moving in the direction? Should they be telling their baseball coaches of their kids' softball team or their baseball team, look, there are certain things we want out of this, and we don't want this attitude that competitiveness and winning is everything?
If the culture is evangelized with Jesus Christ, then all of those things take care of themselves.
In other words, the mind of Christ, the virtues of Christ, the grace of Christ, and everything starts to fall into place.
Of course, in sports and every place else.
And have you found that this message can be pervasive even in the sports world? I mean, are there key people open to this message?
There are key people who are open to it. I would say they are not the great majority. So don't look for it to start in the sports movement. And it's going to start because at some ground root level,
Like Promise Keepers is a good example.
Like Promise Keepers, right. But at some grassroots level, you're going to see things begin to happen in this country, and then they'll affect all our institutions. They'll affect the media. I mean, someday you're going to see the media having more interest in moral issues than they do today, and scolding about moral issues or failure to meet them.
That's why we're here in the media to discuss the church and culture today, and the topic of sports is right at the heart of the culture. And I'd like to thank you, Bowie Kuhn, for being with me on this program. And I'm Dale Hudson, publisher of Crisis Magazine, saying thank you to Bowie, and thank you for being with us today. We'll see you next time.